On today's show, the Bucs defense collapsed, the stars might leave, and now Todd Bowles is taking control. This offseason will define the future of this franchise, and it starts right now. Well, hello and welcome into this edition of the Bucs Report, part of the Bucs Report Podcast Network. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find us online. It's BucsReport.com. And the best way that you can help grow this show is to subscribe or follow the Bucs Report on YouTube, like the videos, and comment anything down below. So in this edition of the Bucs Report, we talk about the future of this team. Todd Bowles is taking control, and this offseason will define the future of this franchise. And it does. It starts right now. In the last episode, I spoke about Mike Evans and how it appears that he is a bit ambiguous, or his representation is anyway, about the future on this team. Do they want to stay? Do they want to go? And that's what we're going to talk about here. Episode or segment one here, Todd Bowles is taking back control of the defense. And that the biggest takeaway is simple. Bowles is taking back control of this defense. And that alone tells you everything you need to know about how things really got. Now, look, Bowles basically admitted it. He said he spent too much time worrying about the offseason or the offense last season. He said his defensive responsibilities slipped. And that's not something you often hear from a defensive head coach. And, you know, it's something I've talked about on this show, the Bucs Minicast, for years. As long as Bowles has been the head coach, is that I think he should delegate that job, the defense, to someone else, that he can just concentrate on things big picture. Now, when you take a look at it, this is a guy whose identity is defense. This is a guy who built a Super Bowl defense. This is a guy whose system terrorized Patrick Mahomes. And yet last year, the Bucs finished near the bottom in passing defense. Dead last in red zone defense, only 37 sacks after averaging nearly 48 per year. Now, that's not Bucs defense. That's not Bowles defense, and he knows it. So hiring Zach Robinson, changes that are around here, wasn't just about fixing the offense. It was about freeing Bowles to go back to what he does best, calling plays. And, at least partially anyway, right? I think that he should concentrate a little bit more on things that are bigger picture. The fact that he won't delegate or relinquish the reins of the defense is something that I guess that's his call to make. But in any event, is that the right thing? But what it does appear is that he is control, at least on paper. I put that in air quotes. So he will be doing that, calling plays, managing adjustments, and controlling games defensively. Now, this means Bowles is all in on fixing this defense himself. And, it's one of those things to say, I realized I made a mistake, but, I'm not going to make that mistake again. And next year, I'm not going to make those same mistakes. I'm going to concentrate on the defense. Now, you got Zach Robinson in place. Is he putting all his faith in him? That's fine. And I think that there's at least some truth to what Bowles is saying here. However, I don't think it's the full scope or the full truth. I think that, he didn't have the right pieces in place. And I think that, when you take a look at other teams, they're more prepared for the Bucs and what you're going to throw at them, because it's Bowles doing Bowles things, calling Bowles plays that I think to a certain extent, what the Buccaneers are doing is a bit predictable. And, when I'm talking about Bowles is all in on fixing it himself, that's both reassuring and terrifying at the same time. because now, as a matter of fact, there are no excuses if this team, does not deliver the way that they should. So, that's where we're at with Bulls. I'm going to be the guy. I'm going to be the guy to take control of the reins and fix this whole thing. I guess that remains to be seen. All right, next, let's pivot to the defense. Didn't just struggle last season. It flat out collapsed. And in the last episode, I spoke about that this season started strong. And if you want to point to a couple things that went wrong last year, I'll pick two. Injuries, of course, were number one for me. And number two was the defense in the latter part of the season. That many games were cost because the Bucs defense was, rather porous. So the biggest takeaway here is the defense didn't just regress. It flat out collapsed. And you saw it week after week, right? This was a team that started out 6-2. 6-2. Everyone thought the Bucs were contenders. The chants out there of Baker Mayfield, MVP. And then all of a sudden they came crashing back to earth and everything fell apart. They couldn't stop the pass. They couldn't get off the field. They couldn't protect leads. And they also couldn't finish games, right? That was one of the things that I spoke about in the last podcast as well, is the late game heroics. And I had Steve Versnick on, and I remember asking him if that's sustainable. And he said, well, of course it's not. And you saw that, in a lot of ways, the Buccaneers got lucky starting the season last year. And what do I mean by luck? Well, when it's late game heroics, I'm glad that you found a way to win the game, but it was, a bit of a coin toss, like, oh, we won. But at some point they didn't win. And that is what is concerning. Now, Bowles even said it himself. The plays that beat them weren't exotic. They were basic bread and butter plays. That's effort. That's execution. That's talent. And that's coaching. And at the end of the day, that is everything. And let's be honest, the pass rush wasn't good enough. Yaya Diaby led the team with 7 sacks. 7. And that's not elite production. I think we all know that. I think that at one point the Bucs were all hopped up and hyped up on Yaya Diaby. We haven't seen that production from him yet. And that's not game-changing production. That's not enough to carry a defense. And Bowles knows it. He said they need better plays. They need bigger players. They need more production. And that tells you major defensive changes are coming. And what does that mean? Draft, free agency, coaching, everything is on the table. Now, of course, we know that the coaching part is pretty well set, I guess I'm going to say, between now and next season. And, again, I'm still a little skeptical. I know that I don't want to be the one that is dunking on Todd Bowles, the first season that his team, misses the NFC South. But with that said, I'm going to go ahead and say, like the last season or two, that the Buccaneers got kind of lucky that they made it to the playoffs anyway. And when I say luck, they got lucky in the fact that they play, in a truly deplorable NFC South, where sometimes sub 500 records will get you into the playoffs. So I think that, he was able to use that as a feather in his hat and on his resume to say, hey, we made it to the playoffs, bang, bang, bang. And how are you going to fire me? Well, they didn't last year. So that's why I'm saying that this coming season in the fall, that there's a lot at stake. I think there's a lot at stake for Bowles. I think there's a lot at stake for Jason Light, that if they don't get it done, then I think we need a breath of fresh air in here, because whatever they thought was going to work, the retreading of the tires, you're like, I know I made a mistake on the defense, but next year I'm going to be better. Those arguments are just simply going to run short, and you're gonna take that to the bank and try to cash it, and it's ultimately going to come back in sufficient funds. All right, so coming up here after the break, the core of the franchise, might be leaving. What will that mean for the Bucs? I'll discuss straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of the Bucs Report, part of the Bucs Report Podcast Network. Again, the best way that you can help grow this show is to subscribe or follow the Bucs Report on YouTube. And let's blow this thing up, right? All right, in the next segment here, we're talking about big pieces, big players that could ultimately be on the move and franchise cornerstones. I alluded to it. I spoke about it in last episode, a Mike Evans esque or a Mike Evans heavy episode. But it's not just Evans, that there are some pillars on this team that might not be here in the future. So the biggest takeaway here is the Buccaneers are preparing for life without Mike Evans and Lavonte David. Now let that sink in. You know, these just aren't any player that I mentioned there. These are franchise legends. These are faces of the organization. You know, Mike Evans is the greatest receiver in franchise history. That's not like, you know, he's pretty good. No, he is the greatest receiver in franchise history. Now, Lavonte David, of course, is one of the greatest linebackers in franchise history. And both, well, they could be gone. And then that would leave more questions than answers. And Evans, like I said, is entering free agency. You know, the team says they want him back, but they're also preparing for the possibility that he does leave. And like I spoke about in yesterday's show, I spoke about that, you know, we want Mike Evans back. And it's one of those things that, you know, you take your kids to the store, you take them down the toy aisle, and what are some of the things that you would like for your birthday or something? And they point to everything. And like, well, I don't have the kind of money to afford all that kind of stuff. So the Buccaneers are in a similar position that I think their fan base looks at the team and they go, well, we want Evans. We want Lavonte David. We want all of these players back. And they're checking their bank account and they're like, yeah, but how are we going to pay to get some better defenders, right? So it is a tightrope and a tough decision for this team because, like I said, both players, David and Evans, two franchise pillars, could be gone. Now, like I said, Evans is entering free agency. Lavonte David is considering retirement. And you heard Bowles say it. He called it a harsh business. Why? Well, because it is. And emotion doesn't matter. Production does. And we even saw more limited production from Lavonte David last season. Of course, Mike Evans was injured for a good chunk of the season. That we can't be too emotional. We can't have warm fuzzies, attached to these players. We want the best players out on the field to give the Buccaneers the best chance to win. So like I said, emotion doesn't matter. Production doesn't matter. Age does. Money does. And the Bucs have major defensive needs. This team is transitioning whether they want to or not. Listen, I don't want to keep getting older. I told my kids, I'm like, you don't keep wishing for your birthday because, you know, you're young once and old forever. And as a guy that is pushing 50 years old, you start thinking to yourself, man, it felt like I was 30 yesterday. Now, I'm not trying to go down a side tributary here, but that is the reality. Life changes, whether you want it or not. And this offseason will determine how painful that transition becomes. I just, you know, I'm kind of in the back of my mind, I'm like, I don't want this to be some kind of rebuild, right? Where all of a sudden Evans is gone, Lavonte David's gone, you know, whatever other players get traded out of here. And this team that didn't make it to the playoffs, well, now they got a bunch of players that are theoretically better, hypothetically better. I don't want, this team was really poor. If you guys don't know, I think you know, for quite a few years, that I don't want, you know, to go back to that. I think they should keep building a better team if they draft well. I'm talking about what they do at the draft, at the free agency, player acquisitions, these kind of things, that it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be, you know, the Bucs got lucky 2 times, winning a Super Bowl twice, but let's be real here. That'll probably never happen again. I think Baker Mayfield here, and I'll do a player profile on him in an upcoming episode. I think he has a lot of good things about his game. There's also some things that I would change as well. Just given the fact that, you know, I know he has happy feet and he likes to run with the football, but sometimes that is, to his own peril because he gets injured. And to be clear here, you know, if he had not done those things before, the Buccaneers may not have won a lot of those games either. So big picture, a lot of questions for the Buccaneers about who stays and who goes. Now, the final segment of today's show, the entire future of the Buccaneers depends on what the entire future of the Buccaneers depends on this offseason. The biggest takeaway is everything depends on what happens next. I don't think that we can gloss over the fact that the defense must improve. The roster must improve. The leadership must improve, and Bowles must deliver. That he gave us the excuse that, last season, I would have done a whole lot more if but for, I was concentrating too much on the offense this season. I swear to God, Dad, I'll do better on my reports. That's kind of what it feels like. Bowles telling Jason Light that, I didn't do well. The team didn't play well because I was too, concerned with the offense. And I got to put up my, you're the head coach, you're the head coach. And I know that it's your job, that you've kind of assigned yourself to take on the defense. We need to see that. Bowles must deliver. And Jason Light said he still believes in Bowles. And, I think that is a partial truth, right? I think the Glazers didn't want to spend any money on a different coach. But again, I guess it'll remain to be seen. But belief doesn't win games. Execution does. The Buccaneers, as a team, as a coaching staff, must execute. And last season, execution simply was not good enough. The team went from 6-2 to missing the playoffs. The Carolina team, right? The Carolina Panthers, they won. I mean, this is some sort of Seinfeld Bizarro World situation here. This simply cannot happen again. The pressure is real. The expectations on this team are real. The stakes are real. And this offseason will determine whether the Buccaneers are rebuilding or retooling. And we're about to find out which one that is. Now, again, I'm not trying to say that I think it's all doom and gloom and despair. But again, like I said, there is a lot at stake, and a lot will be determined if Evans does decide to come back or the Buccaneers decide to have him come back. The Buccaneers said they want him back, right? And if Lavonte David retires, that, there's holes that I talked about in this episode and in previous episodes. But then now all of a sudden you have holes and bigger holes because Mike Evans isn't just an okay receiver. He is the best receiver in franchise history. And Lavonte David is one of the best as well. So it's a tough thing for the Buccaneers to try to assess, to try to get coaches and players to buy into the Tampa brand of football. Because we can't say, hey, remember when we were really good and we won the Super Bowl with Brady? We're quite a few years removed from that now. And I think that players want to look at a team, and especially if they're a player that's worth their salt, they'll say, who's your quarterback? Oh, it's Baker Mayfield. Okay. This is your coach. Is Evans. Do I got Evans here? Do I got Godwin here? Who's up? Who's my running back? What does that defense line look like? Then a lot of ways, the players call their own shots, or they call their own shots via their representation. So I think that, if there is the possibility that Evans walks or Lavonte David walks, then we are going to need to, dig deep and do whatever we got to do to either draft a player, that's hopefully going to be as good. We think of Emeka Egbuka, and we saw flashes of greatness, but no sustained success. That you need a player to come in here that is going to replace an Evans, and that's not going to be cheap. So that's the hard thing as well. If you don't sign Mike Evans, right, or Mike Evans doesn't want to come back, then you're going to have to take that money that you had kind of allocated for Mike Evans and shift that to another player, right? And same thing goes for Lavonte David and so on and so forth. That it's a tightrope for the organization to walk. I think it's not a rebuild. Even semantically, it's not a rebuild. It's like a lot of other teams, it's a retool, and that retool is necessitated by not meeting expectations last year. And how are we going to address that so we can meet those expectations next year, right? So a tough position for the Buccaneers to be in. A really early thing as I record this in the last day of February. That next season seems like forever away. But before you know it, summer OTAs will be going, and we'll be talking about next season. And I'm hoping, right? I'm hoping as a Bucs fan that this team can turn it around and bring back prominence, bring back, some great football back to Tampa, because it's one of those things that year after year after year, people were kind of dunking on the Bucs, and it seems like they kind of started coming around on the Bucs, and now they're like, nah, forget it. I should have never believed him in the first place. But in any event, I think that big questions and kind of a wait and see What does Evans want to do? What does Lavonte want to do? Only time will tell. Listen, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of the Bucs Report, part of the Bucs Report Podcast Network. Again, best way to blow the show up, subscribe, follow on YouTube, on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. My name is Dan Holme of the Bucs Report, and I'll talk to you again next time.